that, right? So you can't remember it.
It's like working in isolation more than.
That's my experience of your thing.
You know, that I was going. The other was going to mention. I was working on anything else, but I probably didn't know.
Well, that's what happened here.
It started their first year.
It's a little fuzzy. Air pockets.
Yeah, do you know in case
Testing. It works. And I'm gonna go like here.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, more or less. All right, let's get started. I think with the introduction. So before introducing our speaker today, let me remind you about the events this coming week, this week and next week. On Friday, we have a lunchtime talk given by Tadeusz Zawicki from George Washington University, and the title of the talk is Pattern Finding and Pattern Making. Tad is a philosopher of cognitive science, a philosopher of mind, with some interest in philosophy of biology. So you're all invited to come to Tad's talk. He comes often to Pittsburgh, so if you want to meet him, I get an opportunity to just have a chat with him after his lecture, and maybe possibly meet with him in the future for work, for example. On Tuesday next week, Sandy Mitchell, our colleague, will be given her lunchtime talk lecture. And the last thing I wanted to add is this weekend, but next weekend, the center is organizing its first workshop called Facts 2 by Kevin Zolman, Kevin Dorst, and Josh Nob. And they're going to be experimental philosophers meet formal philosophers, and hopefully some light comes out of this meeting. We'll find out about that. You're all invited to join us. For this, it's on Saturday and Sunday next week. I think it would be nice if you could send us an email to the organizer of the workshop if you intend to be coming, but you're anyway invited to come. It will be, I believe, it's on this room on the 10th floor. I don't remember. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Raquel Kremple, who comes to the Federal University of São Paulo in Brazil. But Raquel has been with us for already a year, about almost a year. She's a postdoctoral fellow at São Paulo, but also at a center. We've been really happy and very lucky to have her for nearly a year. She works in the philosophy of cognitive science mostly, and she's published widely, but I would just flag out one of I really like, which was really, really good, in Synthèse on color experience and linguistic and the way languages penetrate color experience. It's a really nice paper. I highly recommend it. Recently published in Synthèse. But while she's been at the center, she's been doing a lot of work on what we're going to be hearing about today, Aphantasia.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Eduard. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Right. So what I want to do in this talk is to raise some issues about a view that I think is quite common about conscious thoughts. And this view said that conscious thoughts necessarily involve mental images. So I'm going to do that by presenting what I take to be two counterexamples to that view. So the first will be unsymbolized thinking, and the second will be the case of aphantasia. And so hopefully this will lead us to what I think that these cases show, that mental images are not really necessary for conscious thoughts. So just to start by saying a little bit about this view. So the view says that conscious thoughts necessarily involve mental images. So I'm going to abbreviate this just by saying that consciousness is imagistic, CI. And so I take that this view has been held throughout the history of philosophy a number of times. But it appears in different formulations, I think. But we can find something like that in Aristotle. So he says that thoughts require images. Hume has this view that ideas are copies of sensory impressions. So presumably if ideas are constituents of thoughts, then when we think, we have I don't know, representations that are derived from perception. And more recently, I think that this view has been more well developed by authors like Carruthers and Prince. So Carruthers, for instance, he says that the stream of consciousness is entirely sensory based. And Prince says that every phenomenally conscious mental state is perceptually conscious. We do not have conscious states couched in non-perceptual formats. So just to be a little bit more clear about what I think that this view says, so the view is that conscious thoughts necessarily require or involve mental images, and by mental images, what I take that these authors mean is just the standard way that most people understand mental images. That is quasi-perceptual experiences which occur in the absence of the relevant external stimuli. And that can occur, so it's not just visual, but it could occur like in different sensory modalities. So what they would say is that if someone is thinking about, I don't know, planning to eat an apple after this talk, if that thought is conscious, then the person will presumably have had some kind of quasi-perceptual experience of maybe a visual image of the apple, or maybe some kind of like taste image, or something like that. And now, I mean, we could ask what they, because not all thoughts seem to be like clearly well captured by visuals, by sensory images like visual images. So we often have propositional thoughts that are quite complex and abstract. But in those cases, so if I'm thinking that this view is wrong, for instance, it seems, I don't know, weird to say that some kind of visual image was involved. But in those cases, they would say that, yes, we still have some kind of sensory image there. It's just that it's probably like you heard yourself saying a sentence in inner speech. So, and that in their view, also involves something that's sensory, because you have the impression of hearing yourself talking in your head, something like this view is wrong. So this is just to make it clear what I mean by, or what I think they mean by mental images. But also, yeah, I think it's important to say something about what we mean by conscious thoughts. So Ned Block proposed this distinction between phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness. So phenomenal consciousness just is the experiential or phenomenological aspect of thought, for instance. And access consciousness is the availability for use in reasoning and rationally guiding speech and action. So not everybody accepts that these really are distinct things, but we can, for the purposes here, go along with it. And so we can imagine that the view that I'm trying to attack here could be formulated either in terms of phenomenal consciousness or access consciousness. So someone could hold that only thoughts that involve images have some kind of phenomenology or some kind of experience associated with it. Or we could claim, or someone could claim that only thoughts that involve images can be available for different mental processes, or for as Bloch says, rationally guiding speech and action. So you could imagine that the view could be formulated in these two ways. I think that prints and curators in the end accept both versions, but I'm going to focus here for simplicity on the claim that only access conscious thought, only thoughts that involve images can be access conscious. So we just to say a few things very briefly about what motivates a view like that says that conscious thoughts always involve images. I think that a common motivation is just introspection. So this is how thoughts feel to many people. So Prince, for instance, he claims that introspection suggests that all consciousness is perceptual. Consciousness just seems to be perceptual in nature. But fortunately, he doesn't just rely on introspection. So both Prince and curators, they actually cite many studies that supposedly show that things need to be this way. So they rely on a body of data about attention, for instance. So they think that attention is necessary for consciousness, so only what's attended can really enter working memory and be available for different kinds of processes. And they claim that the empirical studies show that attention is exclusively sensory, so it can only be directed to sensory states. I'm not gonna really discuss this here, but my impression is that they kind of overstate the empirical support that this view actually have. And I think they don't really take into consideration too these two phenomena that I'm gonna present here. So the first will be unsymbolized thinking, and the second, aphantasia. So to start with unsymbolized thinking, this is what psychologist Hurlburt and collaborators call thoughts that do not involve the experience of words, images, or any other symbols. So Hurlburt, he developed this method for investigating conscious experiences that he calls DES, so descriptive experience sampling. And what they do is that people, they go about their normal lives wearing some kind of device that beeps at random intervals, and then people are instructed to attend to their experiences that they're having at the moment of that they hear the beep. And so that happens, I don't know, like 6 times in a day. And so after that, they meet with the experimenter to better describe the experience. And this process goes on for, I don't know, 5 days or something like that. And so what they found is that this experience of thoughts that do not involve words or images or any other symbols is one of the most frequent experiences that people report, together with inner speech or mental images, feelings, etc. And for comparison, this is essentially as a phenomenon that supposedly is as frequent as inner speech. So here are some examples. So they had this subject, Diane. So she said that she was standing in front of the shelves of breakfast cereal, wondering if she should buy a box. And Evelyn, she was watching a commercial for Net Zero, an internet company, and she wondered how much cheaper that is than Cox cable. So according to these people, these thoughts, they were just experiences of pure thoughts. They didn't experience any words or images together with it. So I think that this presents a problem for this field, CI, that consciousness necessarily involves mental images, because this view predicts that this phenomenon, which apparently is quite common, should be impossible. And so if unsymbolized thinking really is a genuine phenomenon, then I think it shows that excess conscious thoughts do not necessarily involve images. So I think here we can imagine at least two possible replies from the supporters of this field. So they could just say that these people are mistaken, and there are at least two forms of mistakes, I think. So one would be to say that they are reporting that these thoughts do not involve the experience of images, but they actually do. So for some reason, so they had that thought, they were thinking in inner speech, say, but when they reported the thought, they just maybe forgot to report that they experienced words, but they just reported what was on the focus of their attention. So they just reported the pure thoughts. And I think that is not unreasonable, because we can think about how we report thoughts, for instance, in ordinary life. So if I'm gonna tell a friend that I was thinking that I need to buy bread, for instance, I don't say that, I just say that I was thinking I need to buy bread. I just say what I was thinking about it. I don't say I was thinking in a sentence in Portuguese that said this and that, included this or that word, that I want to buy bread. So in ordinary life, we just report what we're thinking about. We don't report how those thoughts occur to us. So I think that's right, but I think still we can point to some problems for this suggestion, because we have to remember that this is a special context where people are part of an experiment, more or less, and they know that the investigators they're not interested in the contents of their thoughts necessarily, but they really are investigating their experiences. And in the case of thoughts, I would assume how those thoughts occur to them. So given the context, I think they should be particularly sensitive to the presence of any images or words that occur to them. And so you would think that they would be less prone to this kind of mistake. And the method is developed to minimize error by focusing on particular experiences and not generalizations and so on. So I think this is something to point out. Also, they don't appear to have difficulty in sometimes reporting the presence of images. So people tend to report different kinds of experiences. Also, I think that this proposal has the problem of kind of being maybe inconsistent with their own view of attention, because the proposal here is that participants did not report images that were present because they were focusing attention on the conceptual components of their thoughts, let's say. And so that seems to suggest that attention can, after all, be directed to the conceptual elements and not just sensory elements. And also, I think it's, as other people have pointed out, this is somewhat arbitrary because both Prince and Carruthers, they rely on Hurlburt's data to support their view about how common inner speech is or how common visual images are. But when it comes to unsymbolized thinking, they at least Carruthers, Prince doesn't really discuss that explicitly, but they attribute a mistake in that case. So I think something needs to be said about why people are less reliable when they report unsymbolized thinking, and why we should just trust them in the case when they report images. So this is just commenting on the reply that these people had images present, but we can imagine another kind of response. So Carruthers, for instance, he suggests that maybe these people, they were just self-attributing thoughts that perhaps didn't even occur actually, but that just made sense of their behavior at the time of the beep. So they were just like trying maybe to explain what they're doing. And so they said that they were thinking about something. And so that if the thoughts actually occurred and were imageless, then they must have been unconscious. And here I think some problems are that the self-attribution, so that it seems unnecessary in many cases. So if we consider the case of Evelyn that I mentioned, that she was watching a commercial and wondering how much cheaper that company is than Cox Cable. So it seems she doesn't have any obvious reason to have to explain her behavior at the moment and to self-attribute this specific thought. She could have just said that she was watching the commercial. So there was nothing really to explain there. And also, I think if he conceded that these thoughts occur, but said that they were unconscious, it seems weird because many of these thoughts, they have the marks of access conscious thoughts. So for instance, the case of Diane, that she said she was wondering whether or not she should buy a box of cereal. We can say that that thought presumably was part of her decision-making process of whether she should buy a box or not. She remembered the thought and later reported it. So these are marks of access conscious thoughts. So it seems, I don't know, weird to say that if these thoughts occurred, they were unconscious. All right, so that was the case of unsymbolized thinking, which I think challenges the view that conscious thoughts necessarily involve images. And then the second case is the case of aphantasia. So aphantasia is usually characterized as an impaired capacity to produce visual mental images. So if you ask a person who has aphantasia to imagine an apple or imagine the face of their mother, they will claim that nothing happens in their mind. It's just blank. And apparently that, according to one estimate, this absence of voluntary visual images or forming images in your mind affects about 1% of the population. But what is important to my case here is that aphantasia doesn't seem to be a phenomenon that it's exclusively visual. So actually, in one study, 34% of Aphantasics reported that they have an absence of imagery in all sensory modalities. So it's not that they can't visualize only, but they can't imagine sounds or tastes or any other, or even motion, movements. So just to make it this a little bit more vivid, we can consider some reports. So this is Bill Fall. So he says that when I close my eyes, I see nothing. I silently think and silently read with no auditory voice, and I'm haunted by silent tunes with no auditory sound. And then one participant in his study says that when I try to form an image, nothing happens. It is just blank. And I just recently learned that apparently Derek Harfit had this. So this is from a piece in the New Yorker about him. So the author says that although he recognizes familiar things when he sees them, he cannot call up images of them afterward in his head. He cannot visualize even so simple an image as a flag. He cannot, when he's away, recall his wife's face. Aphantasia is typically diagnosed by means of questionnaires. So the most common one is the vividness of visual imagery questionnaire. So in this questionnaire, people are presented with 4 different, they are asked to imagine 4 different things or scenarios, and then they have to rate how vivid the image is that comes to mind. So in this example, they have to imagine a relative or a friend, and then rate from 5 being perfectly clear and vivid as real scene, and 1, no image at all. You only know that you're thinking of the object. So they have to rate different aspects of the image, like the contour of the face or the colors of the clothes that the person wears. And so typically this is how at least visual aphantasia is diagnosed, and they use different questionnaires that assess the presence of images and other sensory modalities. And so here then are, we again have a problem, I think, for the view that conscious thoughts necessarily involve images, because what I'm calling total aphantasia, which is the condition that affects all kinds of mental images. So it suggests that the conscious thoughts of some individuals can be entirely non-imagistic. And this seems to be more extreme than the case of unsymbolized thinking, because there it was common for people to report unsymbolized thoughts in some samples, but not others. But here apparently some people are just utterly incapable of forming images at any time. And so here again, I think we can imagine 2 kinds of replies from the proponent of the view that consciousness is always imagistic. So one would be to say that, again, just like in the case of unsymbolized thinking, these people are wrong, they have mental images. Maybe it's just a problem in their introspecting their own experiences. Maybe they're just not that good at that. And the second option, I think, would be to say that, to accept that these people have thoughts that lack images, but to say that these thoughts cannot be conscious. So to start with the second option, which I think is easier to dismiss. So, so I think that in saying that these thoughts are unconscious, they would really have to say that Aphantasics have no conscious thoughts at all, given that they lack images. So it's not like in the case of unsymbolized thinking that maybe some thoughts were unconscious, but others are conscious. In this case, it would have to be that they have no conscious thoughts at all. But nothing really indicates that these people differ so dramatically from the rest of the population. So for instance, they have normal performance on IQ tests, for instance, and in many working memory tests. So, and IQ tests, for instance, presumably require reasoning and decision-making, and which again are marks of excess conscious thoughts. So if they lacked excess conscious thoughts, we would have expected that this condition would not have gone unnoticed for so long, but it was really only named in 2015. So I think that suggests that that's probably not their problem. So I think the most promising strategy for the proponent of CI would be to just say that they're wrong because they do have images. So as far as I know, neither Prince nor Carruthers discuss explicitly the case of Aphantasia, but Prince, he says about imageless thoughts that people who report them are simply wrong about their own mental states. So I assume that this is probably what they would say in this case. And I think that a case can be made for that. So as many people have pointed out, we're far from being infallible about our own experiences. So we can be mistaken about different aspects of our mind. So we can be mistaken about the causes of our behavior, or even as Schwitzgebel notes, we can be mistaken, for instance, even about current experiences when many people believe that, for instance, visual experience is very clear and detailed throughout, and like including in the periphery, but that's actually not true. So we can find examples of cases in which people are mistaken about their experiences. And so it could be that maybe Aphantasia is just another case like that. And a stronger reason, I think, that we can derive from Schwitzgebel, from a paper from 2002. He wasn't explicitly discussing the case of Aphantasia because Aphantasia was only named in 2015, but I think it makes sense for this case. So he says that one reason to assume that people can be massively wrong about their visual imagery experiences is that there is really no good correlation between self-reports of vividness of visual imagery and performance on psychological tests that are believed to require image. So for instance, in mental rotation tests that ask people, for instance, that's derived from classic paper by Shepard and Metzler. So subjects had to say if the two images that are presented side by side are the same, but just rotated, or if they are different. And so they found that people who report to be poor visualizers and people who report to be good visualizers tend to exhibit the same kind of performance on these tests, so they perform equally well. So what he concludes from that is that maybe what's happening is that people's experiences don't really vary as much as they claim, as their self-reports suggest, and so that he says that normal people in favorable circumstances make gross and enduring errors about the nature of their visual experiences. So I think that this is a better reason to assume that Aphantasics may be wrong, but I think that there are some problems here again with this attribution of mistakes. So first, I think it's important to notice that this mistake is really quite massive and just maybe not like in the same kind of category as the other mistakes that are attributed to people. So these people, they really must be wrong about what their conscious thoughts are like all the time and not just sometimes. And also, we have to say that when they, like at the moment that they're answering the VVIQ, the questionnaire, for instance, and they're asked to imagine the face of a friend, for instance, they do have an image right there, and they do have that experience, even though they deny that they do. So though that might be possible, I think that's a little bit puzzling. Also, there are cases of acquired visual aphantasia, at least. I'm not sure about cases of acquired forms of aphantasia in other sensory modalities, but at least in the visual case, there are reports of subjects who were capable of visualizing, but for some reason or other lost that ability. And in one study that investigated one of those subjects, the subject was actually performed well in many tasks that are believed to require visual images, but they did find some differences. So like in a fMRI investigation, so they instructed him and controls to imagine the faces of famous people. And in that case, when he was imagining, they found more activation in frontal areas of the brain and less activation in the areas associated with perception of faces when compared to controls. And presumably cases of acquired aphantasia, I think, would be less subject to doubt, because we can just attribute that to maybe a different interpretation about in answering like the questionnaires, like maybe I don't know, people just differ in what they consider vivid or not. But in this case, we would think that the person really noticed a substantial difference in their mental lives. And also, so Schwitzgebel published that paper in 2002, but since aphantasia became a thing in 2015, many psychologists have been trying to investigate it in a more objective way. And they did find differences in performance between Aphantasics and controls in other tests. So in this is one example. So in this study, they exploited the binocular rivalry phenomenon. So binocular rivalry occurs when you present different images to the different eyes. So instead of the images overlapping, what happens is that they alternate and one dominates and then kind of switch to the other. And so what they found is that in people who can form images, if you ask them, if you ask the subject to form a visual image of like a red horizontal pattern, for instance, and then you present a red horizontal pattern and a green vertical pattern to each eye. So what the person reports to see first or predominantly tends to be the image that they were asked to imagine. But that only happens in the case of people who can actually imagine. So doing that with Aphantasics, they don't show this kind of priming of imagery, like imagery priming perception. In this study that was just published this year, they investigated the how pupils react when people imagine bright or dark objects. So if you see in perception, if they present you with a dark triangle, your pupils will be more dilated than when you're presented with a bright triangle. And apparently the same thing more or less happen when people are asked to imagine a dark triangle or a bright triangle. So the pupils will be more dilated when they are imagining the dark triangle instead of the bright triangle. But the same did not happen with Aphantasics. So they didn't show this. They showed the same kind of pattern when they were seeing the triangles, but not when they were asked to imagine them. And just to mention one more, this study, they investigated fear response, biological fear response associated with, for instance, seeing images that are fearful. And so one condition was just seeing stimuli that would produce fear, presumably. And the other condition was participants were instructed to read a story that induced fear. And what they found was that in the case of people who can imagine, they showed a stronger kind of response when they read the story. It was a stronger response associated with fear than Aphantasics when they read the story. But they had both groups had similar reactions when they were visually presented with the stimuli that was supposed to induce fear. So I think that these data then appear to corroborate the reports of lack of visual imagery from Aphantasics. And I think, so there are in fact tasks in which Aphantasics perform similarly to people who can imagine. But in this case, I think, as some people have pointed out, one possibility might be that they're just using different strategies to solve the same task. So I think this, it would be something that we would have to look case by case to try to figure out like which strategies they might be using. But I think it's not like something that we can just dismiss and so I think this is a possibility that's open, and that it might be that, you know, they're just solving the same tests in different ways, and not that these tests really show that people's experiences don't really differ in any way, like Schwitz-Gibel suggests. And so now you might be wondering, so what about inner speech? Because all of these studies really are about visual images in aphantasia. And so the proponent of CI could just say that, yeah, well, maybe these people do lack visual images, but it could still be that their conscious thoughts occur exclusively in inner speech. And as they claim, inner speech involves usually the experience of hearing the words as if you were talking to yourself, and hearing yourself say things in your native language. So what I'm going to say here is more speculative, because there are really, as far as I know, studies investigating inner speech in aphantasia yet. So most of the research has focused on visual image, but at least, as I mentioned in some questionnaires, some aphantasics do report that they lack auditory and even motor images. And so if we consider that, I mean, if we take that seriously, then, and if it's true that inner speech, as many people think, really involve this kind of quasi-sensory experience of hearing yourself talk. So it could be that aphantasics then simply lack inner speech. And we might wonder whether that's possible, but I think there isn't really much research on this, but we can point out to Hurlbird's investigations, for instance. So he says that some participants never reported experiencing inner speech. And in one study, 1 out of 30 participants reported experiencing unsymbolized thinking 80% of the time. And another data that I think is interesting is that there are studies with patients with aphasia, which is a speech disorder, and some in some tasks, at least, they find that people can have preserved outer speech but have deficits in inner speech. So in tasks, for instance, that involve participants being asked to judge whether two words rhyme, so they can do that better if they say the words out loud than if they're just required to do that silently in their minds. They just can't. So I think that these data suggest that maybe it's possible that some people simply don't have inner speech at all. And so it could be that in the case of aphantasia, if they truly lack all kinds of images, and images are necessary for inner speech, it could be that maybe all their thoughts, all their conscious thoughts are like the unsymbolized thoughts that I presented before. And another possibility, I think, is that maybe we should just drop the requirement that inner speech really requires some form of sensory images. So, Watkins, for instance, he's a person who has aphantasia. So he reports of being aware of unheard words that carry thoughts. So in this case, it seems that the experience is different from unsymbolized thinking, because he's saying that he has the experience of thinking in words, he just doesn't have the impression of hearing the words internally. Whereas in the case of unsymbolized thinking, the experience supposedly doesn't involve words at all. So it could be then that total aphantasics have inner speech, but that just inner speech doesn't always involve images, and so they think in words but don't have the impression of hearing the words. To conclude, then I think both unsymbolized thinking and aphantasia challenge this view that conscious thoughts always involve images, at least in the case of access conscious thoughts. And they suggest that images are not really necessary for access conscious thoughts. And I can just point out that I think this, the case of total aphantasia, at least, I think it has interesting implications for views about episodic memory, imagination, self-knowledge, cognitive phenomenology, because it's quite common for philosophers to claim that mental images are necessary for this or that. And so if it's true that aphantasia really lack images, then this could be a challenge to other views as well, not just views about conscious thoughts. That's it.
We take a 3-4 minute break, and then we'll reconvene for questions.
She would say.
Yeah, I know.
And all these other Catholic names, like,
Yeah.
So vindication.
Great.
Oh, yeah, I know. I've always. That's what it is. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't let it just make you go.
Yeah, you're thinking to think about.
I know.
I mean, if you think about. I don't know, but to be honest, Friday is one of the things that.
Yeah. I will say this, I think it's funny.